My name is Kelsey, and I'm going to be presenting my elaboration for educational psychology. My scenario kind of goes back in time to when I was in high school. I was a lifeguard at the local pool, and my duty as a lifeguard was to provide a safe environment to all patrons of the pool, no matter what their age. So looking back at my job as a lifeguard, I see a lot of ways in which I use psychology to provide this safe environment. My first section is on behaviorism, and my first term is stimulus. A stimulus is a specific object or event that influences an individual's learning behavior. My second term is response. A response is a specific behavior that an individual emits. And then my third term is classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a form of learning in which a new, involuntary response is acquired as a result of two stimuli being presented at the same time. So to relate those terms together, there's a formula that I will describe. And in the first line of the formula, a stimulus will elicit some sort of response. This response is either undesired or it could be no response at all, which is a neutral stimulus. So to get the desired response, the stimulus is presented along with a second stimulus, which will be presented while responses are being emitted, which will elicit a different response or a learned response. Eventually, the first stimulus will be associated with this learned response, and the learned response will then appear every time the first stimulus is presented alone, without the aid of the second stimulus. So to relate this back to working at the pool and providing a safe environment for everybody at the pool, we had to take a pool check every single hour at the hour. So us lifeguards would stand up and blow our whistle. At the beginning of the summer, a lot of the swimmers would just think that we were either blowing our whistle at somebody who was doing something wrong, or that they really had no idea at all why we were blowing this whistle. So they would just stop and stare at us, or just continue swimming. And that was their first response to the stimulus, which is blowing the whistle. So then eventually, we tried a second attempt, which was blowing the whistle and then yelling, "Pool check." Yelling "pool check" is the second stimulus. So once we yelled that, everybody knew that it was time to get out and take a break. Eventually, the kids would get out of the pool, which was the learned response, whenever they heard the whistle blow, which was the first stimulus, and they would get out of the pool without the lifeguards having to yell "pool check" or yell anything else. So my question for behaviorism is, do you think that using classical conditioning was the best way to handle this situation? What would be another way to teach swimmers this learned response? My answer to this question was, you could have used operant conditioning by changing the stimuli and just yelling "pool check" for the rest of the summer, and omitting the whistle blowing in order to change this response. My next section is on self-efficacy, and my terms for this section are self-efficacy, which is a belief that one is capable of executing certain behaviors or reaching certain goals. My second term is resilience, which is the belief that one can perform a task successfully even after experiencing setbacks. My third term is affect, which is what you like. So to relate all these terms together, if a person likes something, which is affect, then they will want to do a certain task, but this does not mean that they will have a high self-efficacy to complete this task in which they like. If a person has a high self-efficacy, then they will be more likely to keep trying, which is resilience, even if they have failed previously. If the person likes whatever they were doing, which is affect, then they will want to try, but it does not necessarily mean that they will really believe right then and there that they can accomplish that task. So to relate this back to providing a safe environment for all patrons of the pool, we had to keep inexperienced swimmers from swimming in the deep end. They had to stay in the shallow end. And in order to prove that they had become experienced, they had to swim in the water that was 5 feet deep, and they had to swim across the pool and back without stopping in order to pass the swim test. So the kids like to swim where they could not reach, which is in the deep end of the pool, which is affect. Therefore, they would want to take the swim test. Most of them would have a high self-efficacy and really believe that they could pass the swim test because they did not think that swimming across the pool would be that challenging. Some of the kids would pass, but the kids that did not pass would always hesitate to try again. They still liked to swim in the deep end of the pool, but they now had a low self-efficacy, which interfered with resilience. Eventually, the kids would regain their high self-efficacy and try again because they really believed that they could pass this swim test. My question for self-efficacy is, what would have been another motive for the kids to keep trying to pass the swim test besides their self-efficacy? My answer to this question is pure modeling. If they saw other kids or other friends swimming in the deep end, they would want to as well. And this would serve as a motivation for them to keep trying so they could swim in the deep end with them. This brings me to my last and final section of my elaboration, which is memory. My 3 terms for this section are maintenance rehearsal, long-term memory, and organization of schema. First, maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal is a rapid repetition of a small amount of information to keep it in fresh working memory. Long-term memory is a component of memory that holds knowledge and skill for a relatively long time. Organization of schema is the cognitive process in which learners make connections among various pieces of information that they need to learn. To relate all these terms together, maintenance rehearsal is information that is stored and located in the working memory and is forgot as soon as you stop thinking about it or repeating the information. This is information that is never stored in long-term memory. Information that is in the long-term memory is organized into schemas such as concept maps. The schemas build upon each other and allow a person to relate one object to the other. To relate memory to providing a safe environment at the pool, everybody had to learn to jump off the low board before they could jump off the high board. So once swimmers had mastered jumping into the pool off of the low diving board, they wanted to try and jump off the high diving board usually. The high diving board stands 12 feet in the air. Even though this seems like a simple transition to a board that is 2 feet in the air compared to 12 feet in the air, it is quite the task. So I always start by telling people to remind themselves not to look down once they reach the top of their ladder, which is maintenance rehearsal. They just keep repeating to themselves, don't look down, don't look down, don't look down. And as soon as the swimmer stops telling themselves to not look down, they look down and become frightened. I also tell the swimmer to recall going off the low diving board and try to associate all the steps with the high diving board because they are the same steps just on 2 different heights of diving boards. When doing this, the swimmer has to dig into the information within their long-term memory and add jumping off the high board to the schema associated with jumping off the low diving board. So my question for memory is, what other terms associated with memory are used when trying a new task such as jumping off the diving board? My answer to this question is, the swimmer could also be using procedural knowledge. Procedural knowledge would help a swimmer recall the step of how to jump off the low diving board. Because this information is something that the swimmer would be able to verbally describe, it would be explicit knowledge. That is my elaboration. Thank you for watching.